But he didn't make any promises on student debt.
Well, let me ask you, in terms of the ambition.
Piers Morgan went straight for the jugular when he brought up the £100 billion in the room student loan debt. His question was simple and clear. What is Labour's actual plan to address this staggering financial burden?
Mealy-mouthed about it. We said from day one that we would end tuition fees, that we would make our national education service free at the point of need.
Piers has acknowledged that you've...
Angela Rayner, however, seemed completely unprepared to handle the heat. Instead of providing a direct answer, she veered off into a monologue about fairness and education reform, avoiding the numbers entirely. It was painful to watch. You could see she was trying to steer the conversation toward ideals rather than addressing the cold, hard facts Piers was demanding.
Dad, he's going to get rid of all tuition fees and he's going to pay off all the debts. Now it turns out that was a load of old baloney. You're not going to get rid of any of the debts, are you?
What stood out was the stark contrast between Piers' straightforward approach and Angela's evasiveness. He wasn't asking her to solve the debt crisis in one sentence, but a simple acknowledgement of Labour's specific plans, or lack thereof, was the bare minimum. Angela's response, or lack of one, left viewers frustrated.
Would clear their debt because Jeremy Corbyn told a student, largely student publication, the NME, before the election, I will...
Piers asked her again and again, how much of the debt do you plan to reduce? How will you manage it without passing the cost to taxpayers? These were legitimate questions that anyone affected by student debt would want answers to. Angela's inability to offer anything concrete made her look out of her depth.
And to a lot of people who voted for you, that might have sounded like a promise. Was it?
Susanna, you know that there was...
The issue wasn't just that she didn't know the numbers. It was the way she danced around the question, hoping to shift focus. People watching from home could see right through it. When Piers asked tough questions about a topic that deeply affects millions of people, Angela's vague responses only made her seem disconnected from the real struggles of students and graduates. It felt like she had no real plan, just empty rhetoric.
Nearly at £100 billion worth of student loan debt. Can you give me a rough guide to how much of that you...
If there's one thing Piers Morgan is known for, it's refusing to back down. This interview was no exception. Every time Angela tried to deflect, Piers pressed harder, refusing to let her escape the point. His focus was laser sharp. What is Labour's plan for the £100 billion student loan debt? Each time she dodged the question, Piers called it out. His tone was sharp, his questions direct, and he wasn't about to let Angela bury the issue under vague talking points.
The Labour Party would like to reduce it by?
Well, Piers, let's be clear, 30% of it is never repaid. It's just, stays with...
Angela tried to steer the conversation toward issues like fairness in education and Labour's broader goals. Piers wasn't having it. He kept bringing her back to the core question. I'm not asking for ideals, he said, clearly exasperated. How much of this debt will you reduce? What's your plan? It was the kind of grilling politicians should expect but rarely face these days.
Transcript of what Jeremy Corbyn said. You're picking out one particular word. He said that he would look at the loan repayments over a longer period. He would look at other ways of trying to look at that debt.
Labour didn't come into this issue with a clean slate. Jeremy Corbyn's earlier comments about dealing with student debt had given many people hope. He had told a student publication that Labour would deal with the debt, and to a lot of voters that sounded like a promise. People assumed Labour was committed to providing real relief for the financial burden facing university graduates. It was a message that resonated deeply, particularly with young voters. But Angela's performance in this interview shattered that trust.
But he didn't make any promises on student debt.
Well, let me ask you, in terms of the ambition.
During the interview, she backtracked, claiming that Labour had never promised to address existing debt. Piers wasn't about to let her rewrite history. He pushed her on the difference between raising people's expectations and delivering on them. When you say you'll deal with something, people take that as a promise, he said, highlighting the power of words in politics. And he was absolutely right. When leaders raise hopes, they have a responsibility to either follow through or provide a clear explanation of why they can't. Angela's deflection felt like a betrayal of the trust Labour had built with students and graduates.
that students didn't understand that. They do understand that. And
when you say you're going to deal with something,
Susanna,
are we now going to assume that I will...
The bigger problem wasn't just the backtracking, it was how Angela handled the fallout. Instead of addressing the issue head-on, she tried to argue that people had misunderstood Labour's intentions. But that argument didn't hold water. People weren't just upset because of a misunderstanding, they felt misled. And Angela's evasive answers only added fuel to the fire.
And what we said, and at the time, Piers, nobody was talking about this because it wasn't an issue, because people understood what we meant by our student fees and student debt. The reason people are talking about it...
This is where Piers' approach was so effective. He didn't let Angela off the hook. He reminded her, and the viewers, that words matter. Promises, even implied ones, carry weight. When Labour hinted at tackling student debt, it gave people hope. Failing to deliver on that hope, and then refusing to take accountability for it, damages trust in a way that's hard to repair.
Hey.
But that wasn't the question I asked you. I just asked you how much of the near 100 million, I think it's 76 billion pounds of student loan debt now, how much of that, in your ambitious plan...
Angela Rayner handled Piers Morgan's questions. Felt like watching someone try to play chess without knowing the rules. From the moment the spotlight was on her, it was clear she wasn't prepared. When Piers pressed her about Labour's plans for the colossal £100 billion student debt, she stumbled. Instead of answering directly, she veered off into a series of vague statements about fairness and education reform. It didn't just come across as unprepared, it came across as evasive.
The commitment on the manifesto to deal with student debt. I've made that absolutely clear. We said from day one that we would abolish tuition fees.
What stood out most was her inability to stay focused. Piers kept asking her one specific question: how much of the debt would Labour reduce? It wasn't a trick question or an unreasonable ask. It was the kind of straightforward question any leader in her position should have anticipated. But Angela didn't answer. Instead, she rambled, dodging the numbers and deflecting to unrelated topics. Her lack of clarity wasn't just frustrating, it was damaging to her credibility.
And the fact that they've just increased the fees and the debt again.
We challenge them all the time, and here's my point, Angela. I agree with you about tuition fees. I have savage Nick.
The problem with Angela's approach was that it wasn't just one slip-up. It felt like a pattern. She had multiple opportunities to address Piers' question head-on, and each time she chose to sidestep. For viewers, this wasn't just about student debt. It was about whether Angela could handle the pressure of leadership. If she couldn't manage a tough but fair interview, how would she handle a real crisis? How could people trust her to represent them when she seemed so unsure of her answers?
Question. It's not a difficult dynamic. You've done this many times.
I answered it, Piers.
Let me try one more time.
I answered your question,
You have said,
Piers.
you yourself have said...
Go again, let's do it again.
You yourself have said...
Leaders are expected to be sharp, precise and prepared, especially when discussing issues that affect millions of people. Angela's performance didn't inspire confidence. Instead, it left many people wondering if she was truly ready for the responsibilities of leadership. Her inability to provide specifics, combined with her habit of deflecting, made her look out of touch and unprepared.
Not mine, and endorsed by Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. Everyone's agreed it's now the ambition is to deal with the student loan debt, which is currently...
Piers Morgan, on the other hand, showed exactly why he's such a formidable interviewer. He wasn't there to play nice or let Angela off the hook. His sharp, direct style cut through her political spin, exposing not just her weaknesses, but also the broader challenges Labour faces as a party. He didn't settle for vague answers or long-winded monologues. He kept the focus on the question at hand, refusing to be distracted or deflected.
Which will help students today, including those with student debt. They're things that we can do immediately. Anything else, we will not be setting out plans to deal with student debt.
What made Piers so effective in this interview was his ability to simplify complex issues and get straight to the heart of the matter. Student debt is a massive issue affecting millions of students, graduates and their families. Piers zeroed in on the one thing everyone wanted to know: what's Labour's plan? And when Angela couldn't answer, he made sure the viewers noticed. His persistence wasn't just about holding her accountable, it was about getting clarity on an issue that matters deeply to the public.
our commitments.
Yeah, but you keep answering a completely different question. I'm only asking you how much of the 76 billion...
I've answered the question.
Let me try it one more time.
We did not commit.
This kind of interviewing is rare these days. Too often, politicians are allowed to ramble and deflect without being challenged. Piers doesn't let that happen. He asks the hard questions, and when he doesn't get a straight answer, he calls it out. It's the kind of journalism that keeps politicians honest, or at least tries to. Watching him refuse to back down during this interview was a reminder of how important it is to have media figures who aren't afraid to push for real answers.
The Tories have done a terrible job in conjunction with Liberal Democrats in racking up these tuition fees. I've got 3 kids at school and university.
In this interview, Piers didn't just hold Angela accountable, he set a standard. He showed that politicians should be ready to provide clear, honest answers, especially on issues as important as student debt. For viewers, it was refreshing to see someone cut through the noise and demand real accountability. For Angela, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that vague answers and evasive tactics aren't enough. And for Labour, it was a warning. If their leaders can't handle tough questions, how can they expect to lead the country? So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.